This is 9/11 Freefall.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is another episode of 9/11 Freefall. I'm your host, Andy Steele. Thanks again for listening. Tonight, my guest is Roland Angle. Roland is one of the experts featured in 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out, the documentary put out by AE 9/11 Truth. He's an engineer with over 40 years of experience. He's also a former Green Beret who was trained on how to use explosives to bring down steel structures. So that means his opinion is going to be very valued in our discussion tonight about the issue we talk about every week on this show, the fact that the three towers that fell on 9/11, buildings 1, 2, and 7, were brought down in controlled demolitions that day. So in the interview tonight, Roland's going to be talking about that evidence from his own perspective. He's also going to be addressing engineers out there who may be in the closet, who may know about this issue and the evidence, but may be afraid of speaking out about it for whatever reason. All right, there's things you can still do to spread the word, little things, baby steps towards getting the truth out there. And that's all it really takes, folks. That's one of the beauties of this movement. All you got to do is get the word out however you can. You know, you can have loud conversations if you're on the subway or out in the park with your friends. Be a human radio, as I like to call it. Because when you do that, when you talk about it unapologetically, it removes the taboo from the issue and more people feel free to speak out. I've seen it demonstrated myself many times. When I start talking about this, other people start talking about this. It becomes more acceptable. I've lifted that gag off of their mouths, that concern about being socially acceptable, about being politically correct. People drop that when you speak freely yourself. And I think a lot of the censorship that we see on this issue in our society is more self-perpetuated. People censor themselves. And that's not good, obviously, because it enables the cover-up that we're seeing. You know, they talk about enablers when somebody's an alcoholic. Well, we have enablers here to a crime. And so if we're going to have justice, if we're going to acknowledge what's right in front of our faces, we need to be less afraid. And so there's all sorts of things that you can do to get the word out, and things that you can do that maybe we don't even know, but you need to do them because this is your country. Your country is at stake. All right, before I play my interview with Roland Angle, we're going to do what we do every week. We're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families and all the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. We're going to do that starting now. And that is 10 seconds. Roland Angle graduated from the University of California, Berkeley in 1964 with honors as a civil engineer. He passed the California Civil Engineering Professional Engineers exam the first time he took it back in 1967, and he's been a licensed professional engineer in that state ever since. He served in the U.S. Army Special Forces as a Green Beret from 1964 to 1970, and he received training in the use of explosives to destroy steel structures and vehicles. His engineering experiences included analysis of blast effects on launch facilities of the Minuteman missile system. He'll probably be explaining what that is, as well as working for large engineering corporations, mid-sized companies, and he's also been self-employed as an engineer and contractor. He's also taught engineering in the subjects of drafting, mathematics, and physical sciences, and he holds a lifetime secondary teaching credential in the state of California. That is a mouthful, but he's here right now. Roland Angle, thank you so much for coming on 9/11 Freefall.
Thanks a lot for having me on.
Now, I went over your resume. Feel free to elaborate, include anything that I left out.
Well, I've been at this for some time, as you noted, and I have devoted my life pretty much to engineering and engineering subjects in various guises. And I think I'm qualified to speak knowledgeably from a professional standpoint on the collapse of the buildings that occurred at the World Trade Center. So I've looked into it at some depth. I've joined Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth because I feel that the information and analysis that they put forward is vital to understanding what really happened that day. And I'm very interested in defending the reputation of the engineering profession, which I believe has taken a serious hit and was essentially a scapegoat and a fall guy for the building failures that day.
That's right. We talk about that in the past, how the profession itself, it seems like more people involved with it would want to take a look at these alleged high-rise failures. Of course, when we say the word collapse on the show, referring to the towers in New York on 9/11, we tend to put a quote-unquote around them because collapse isn't necessarily the word to describe it. But, yeah, it seems that more people in these building professions should be looking at this, should be scratching their heads and asking the same questions that we do on this show, that the experts and experts speak out, which you are one of them, ask. And this is an issue that affects them even more so just in terms of the purity of their science, and calls into question who's allowed to determine what is reality. You know, is the government allowed to say 2 + 2 = 5 just because there's a political agenda attached to that? We use that reference from 1984, the book 1984, a lot because I think it applies here, where they're just allowed to change scientific reality to suit their aims. Now, before we get into 9/11, I want to ask you, and for our audience, what kind of stuff do civil engineers do in the military?
Well, the term engineer in itself is an ancient word that goes back to the engines. The original meaning of the word engine was engine of war, and devices such as catapults and crossbows and all sorts of methods of warfare and weapons of war and defenses against those weapons was the original field of engineering. And civil engineering, of which I am one, was designated as specifically to differentiate itself from military engineering, in the sense that civil engineering was supposed to be designed with civil structures, not military structures. That is, dams and roads and water supply systems, electrical, all these things that are necessary for our modern society to function are designed by civil engineers. But in many cases, and in most cases, engineers are still, due to the nature of their work, often involving large-scale projects, they often work for the government or for contractors that are working for the government. So one of the reasons why I think that the defense of our profession has not been adequately taken up is because the economic ties of our profession are still primarily controlled by government access to contracts. So that tends to muffle any defense of the integrity of whatever design failures, if there were any, that occurred on that day. And that's why most of the engineers, I mean, there's a couple of thousand engineers that have signed the AE profession petition. And if they're still working, they probably aren't working for the government, because it's not going to sit well in your resume that you have questioned the official story about what happened on 9/11 if you're trying to get work from the government. So that acts as a tremendous deterrent. And I am self-employed now, so I can take that chance. I'm not getting work from the government, and I don't know how many of the guys people that have signed the petition are getting contracts from the government. But if they are, they took a tremendous political and economic risk by signing that petition. So that's one of the things that's going on in the background that makes this sort of a David and Goliath fight. Many of the people that I'm sure understand that what was purported to happen couldn't possibly have happened, don't speak out because they have a dog in the fight. They still need to make a living.
Well, and at the risk of letting the libertarian in me bleed through the non-political nature of the show, this is a problem when you have government as the heartbeat pumping money towards professions like this. When you have a large people in a particular group, whether it be a profession or just some kind of expert group, who are getting their money from a single source. If something gets corrupted within that source, then everybody gets compromised, and it becomes a question of lose your job, deal with the repercussions, and by speaking the truth, or just stay silent and shut up and let the injustice take place. So what you're saying illustrates that to me, and it's a major issue. It's something that we have to overcome as a group, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and getting more and more people to acknowledge this and put their name to the petition on our website, and having a national dialogue about it. Now, you wrote when you signed the petition that you did blast analysis of nuclear hardened facilities, and I just want to focus on this because it sounds very kind of interesting and cool. So I want you to describe to our audience what that is and what kind of work goes into that.
Well, in the early 60s, when they decided that they were going to build a missile system to deliver nuclear bombs to wherever in the world they wanted to, they came up with a plan for the Minuteman missile system, for the land-based system, and the Poseidon system for the nuclear sub system. But I worked on for the Ralph M. Parsons Company, who designed the launch facilities for the Minuteman missile system. The Minuteman missile system at that time consisted of 1,054 missiles that were buried in silos in the ground throughout the Midwest, and they were to be continually monitored and controlled by the Air Force through a very elaborate launch control system. The missiles themselves were built by the Boeing Company, and each missile had multiple warheads on it. And so this system was designed to take a nuclear blast before being launched. In other words, if somehow the Russians, who were the designated enemy at that time, were able to launch a missiles against the U.S. system and actually explode those bombs in the vicinity of the missiles themselves, that the facilities were designed to withstand that nuclear blast before being launched. So in other words, you could take a hit first, and then you could still launch a counterattack. That was the thinking, to make it absolutely fail-safe. So the launch facilities themselves consist of concrete silos, essentially, that are buried in the ground with a blast door over the top of it that is controlled by a remote location, a launch control facility, which is essentially a concrete and a reinforced concrete and steel egg that's buried in the ground and has communications to 10 missile sites. And there are 2 Air Force officers in the launch control facility, and it also is designed to take a near miss with a nuclear blast and still withstand all the communications, the personnel, and the missiles themselves are designed to withstand that hit before they are launched. So the design had to take into account this tremendous blast effect that was going to be felt by a nuclear device being detonated in the near vicinity. That's what we did.
So that always fascinated me as a kid. I was born in the ending years of the Cold War, pretty much when the world knew the Soviet Union was falling apart. So I didn't have to get under my desks or any of that hysteria, but you know, it was still there, and my father would talk to me about this, and it was always, or he always described it as, well, somebody can't strike the other person first because there's a button that will go off automatically if one side gets struck, they'll just launch theirs immediately. And I would always wondered how that worked. But essentially, that's what you're describing right there, is how our missiles would have been protected if there had been a Soviet first strike, and then I'm assuming there would be some kind of automated system that would go into effect to launch missiles back at them.
Well, it was called, the official doctrine was called mutually assured destruction, or MAD. And that was, each system was designed to withstand a first strike from the other side and still be able to retaliate. So in other words, there was nothing you could do to win. There was nothing you could do to prevent a nuclear strike from occurring on your own territory. No matter if you struck first, they would still be able to strike back. So that was built into the engineering design of the entire system.
Now, obviously, you did all of this work. You're very concerned about the well-being of America, of protecting it from enemies. Most of your career, obviously, focusing on foreign ones. But you were very patriotic, I would assume, and very concerned with doing your right job to serve this country. Moving to 9/11. How did you awaken to the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence, and what made you start speaking out about it?
Well, on the morning of 9/11, I was at home in Oakland, California, and I was involved with actually a car theft. Somebody had stolen a car in my neighborhood, and I was out talking to the police and the tow truck people and so on, and I got this message that there had been a plane flown into the World Trade building, and so I, like everyone, I was stunned. I went inside, I watched the shows, and at the time I wasn't aware of the collapse of Building 7 later that day. I'd stopped watching TV by that time, and I really didn't get that news for some time afterward. I can't even remember exactly when I heard. But I was intrigued by the fact that the buildings seemingly came down the way they did. It didn't look right to me. There were I wasn't familiar with the design assumptions of the buildings and how they'd been constructed or anything like that. But it just the way that they seemed to explode as they came down seemed to me. I wondered how could that possibly be? It just didn't seem right. But I was concerned with other things, and I was out of the industry by that time in terms of working for I was working for a mid-sized firm in Oakland, California, on dock facilities at the Oakland port. But so I didn't think too much more about it. It occurred to me from time to time that there was just something curious about that, and I figured it would come out in the engineering profession. There would be discussions about the failures and so on. However, I never really saw that. I never really heard too much about it, and it was kind of curious to me. Then I happened to hear Richard Gage on a talk show, and he was raising these questions, and it just struck me all of a sudden that this was the dialogue that I had been waiting to hear, and I wanted to get involved in it. So I found one of the presentations that he was going to put forward. I think it was out in Walnut Creek, and I went out there and I listened to what he had to say, and I saw his presentation, and I became convinced that that in fact what he was saying was true, and what we had been subjected to was the illusion of a certain event, but the reality behind it was quite different, and it directly involved my particular field of work, and therefore I felt, a professional responsibility to try to be involved in this, figuring out what had really happened. So I signed the petition, and I became active, and I've done various things with architect engineers. I've got to know Richard and some of the other folks that are involved, and really see it as a defense of our profession, and I think the public, we actually are duty bound by the law to speak out on matters of public safety that we have expertise in. So I consider it to be my duty to speak out on this, because I happen to be in a position that have some information that I think is very relevant to the conversation.
Now, that your story about what you were doing on 9/11, I think, is so far the most interesting one I've heard from any guest. You were trying to track down a stolen car that morning, and so it goes to show the kind of personality you have, somebody that when you see a wrong, you're going to go and try to right it to the best of your ability. So it's no wonder when you woke up to this, you signed the petition and started speaking out. You mentioned something about the law. And I want you to clarify it. Backstory, I think this was before 9/11. I remember it on the news. There was a wedding in Israel, and people were dancing on the floor. You saw a video of it. And then the floor collapsed. The entire wedding party goes falling right, I forgot how many floors. It made big news. It was a terrible image, because you see a baby in the video, and then the baby disappears into this big hole. And I just remember that they went down and they grabbed the designer of the building. I don't remember if it was the architect or an engineer, but the guy who was responsible for this building, for creating it, they went and grabbed him right up and dragged him down to the police station, like, right that morning. I'm still sort of unfamiliar with what the laws are for architects and engineers in this country regarding if something goes wrong with a building, and does that extend to things like 9/11? Like, if you see obvious frauds, such as in the NIST reports, and you stay silent, other than being guilty of an ethical violation and being guilty from your silence, is there something in the law that says that you could be prosecuted?
Well, here's the thing: you can make a mistake, and there is a form of insurance that actually you can carry as an architect or an engineer, called errors and omissions. To err is human. People make mistakes. So you can carry insurance for a mistake. On the other hand, if the mistake that you make is such of an egregious nature that it would indicate fraud or corruption or some criminal intent, then yes, you can be prosecuted. That's the reason why engineers and architects are licensed. And the license for engineers is issued by the state. And that is a contract between you and the state, in which they're going to grant you a license so you can practice this profession. And you, on the other hand, promise to practice that profession in an ethical and competent manner. So, as a civil engineer who deals with structures that the public uses and exposed to every day, the matter of public safety is of paramount importance to your professional life. That's what you're involved in doing, is preserving public safety. That is your job. So if there's a huge failure and loss of life and property is involved, there is going to be, and there should be, an investigation. If it's found that some criminal activity was involved, yes, you can be charged and you can be prosecuted under the criminal statutes.
Now, you mentioned before about the effect that this has had on the profession, of how this issue of what really happened to the towers in New York impacts the engineering industry. Professionals. Have you spoken to other professionals about this in the year since you woke up to this? And what do they say?
Well, what I get is, to a large degree, a denial. That they don't want to talk about this issue publicly. The ones that I know, and I know, of course, the guys that I know go back to my era, and most of them are either retired by now or working as consultants. And they, it's interesting. I went to school for years with a very close friend of mine, still a close friend, And we went to Cal together, and I know his education, I know his background, I know what he knows, and he doesn't want to really address this question. He's he's sick now. He's got some health problems and so on. So I can understand where he doesn't want to take this on at this point. But I think everybody finds some. There are different points of view, but in general, this is a tough one to take on. I mean, this is an event of worldwide significance. I mean, hundreds of millions of lives have been impacted because of the events of that day. It's not easy for somebody to say, kind of square up and say, well, I'm gonna take this on. Even if there is a group like AE 9/11 Truth, that group is subject to all kinds of defamatory attacks that actually have no ground in reality whatsoever. But it's like, if there was a problem with brain surgery, I wouldn't be speaking out on it because I'm not an expert on brain surgery. But this is civil engineering, okay? And yet, all kinds of people. I mean, for instance, the writers at Popular Mechanics, none of whom were engineers, felt compelled to write these long analysis about how everything that the 9/11 Truth movement about is bogus. Well, they don't really know what they're talking about. They haven't been trained in this profession. They don't know. I doubt that they could tell you the laws of physics that were involved, or the characteristics of explosives, or the chemical analysis. They feel free to speak out on this and defame our profession, and they have no basis to do so. That's really what drives me to try to do something about this.
I have a buddy who's a very funny guy, and I would love to. I would love to have him on this show with me. I don't think he's not really much of a performer, though. It's just kind of spontaneous. But he was talking about this issue, 9/11 Truth, the science proving the building destructions in New York were done by controlled demolition, and he said, just out of nowhere, if 2,000 doctors came out and said that Jiffy Pop will kill you, all right, there would be major news stories, hysteria. Jiffy Pop's stock would plummet in a day before anyone even looked at it. All right, I mean, if 2,000 doctors came out and said something like that, people would pay attention. They would look at that number and say, well, there's something in there. Now, in this case, obviously, that's using a silly example. In this case, you have very reputable architects, engineers, people vetted, people who aren't just making a statement like that case, that example, Jiffy Pop will kill you, but people who are actually proving it, talking about the physics, pointing out the molten steel. All right, fires cannot get hot enough from the jet fuel and office furniture to melt steel. So they're actually making their case. They're not just making a statement. And so how does our press respond? Do they even look into these questions? No, the automatic default rebuttal is just ridicule, as you explained just now. And so that's when people start looking at wider conspiracies and things like that. Again, we just focus on the science here, but it does leave you saying, what's going on here? What's happening in the media? Why does somebody's credentials fail to be recognized because they're talking about physics and common sense on 9/11? And it becomes so obvious that something's going on there behind the scenes. You talked about talking to other engineers and whatnot, and you've worked for companies. You've also been an independent contractor. 9/11's unprecedented quote-unquote collapses. What effect did this have on the building industry itself? Did you see any kind of changes, any kind of discussions within the industry, with insiders who may have to adjust how they do business?
Well, I think from my perspective, my personal experience has been just this resounding silence. I mean, there's really no. I mean, this is a catastrophic event for our profession. And yet the reaction has been as if, well, let's just keep going. No definitive analysis. No. I mean, there was a few cosmetic changes to the fire code that supposedly are in response to this, but they're really nothing. This is just detail work that has no significant effect upon the practice of the profession in the field. So literally, there's been no change. There's been no significant change, and there's been no significant discussion about it. I mean, there are a lot of interesting discussions that you could have had. For instance, the two towers were this really modern and radical design concept of a tube within a tube. And, somebody could have said, well, this proves that system is totally inadequate and doesn't work. But nobody's come forward and said that. Nobody has made that claim. It would be a perfectly legitimate theory to pursue at this particular time, but the point is that nobody really wants to discuss the collapse mechanism and what happened and so on and so forth, because as soon as you get into that, you get into all these anomalies. There's just no way to explain what happened given the facts, as we've been presented with them by the official story, that is. So, therefore, it cuts off all, it's just, the conversation just doesn't happen.
Right, and with the Twin Towers, most normal people, putting aside engineers, just think they know what happened. They think the planes went into them, and somehow that caused the building to fall down. They don't really wonder what happened after the planes hit. They don't really know what the official story is regarding what happened to the Twin Towers. They'll adamantly defend it. They don't actually know what it is. But with Building 7, it just seems that more people who are making these buildings, designing them, building them, getting money off of them, building a reputation over these buildings standing, might be concerned that a building not hit by an airplane could fall down in 6.5 seconds because of random office fires. It just baffles me that nobody would look into how we prevent this from happening. That somebody who, let's pretend the Building 7 story was legitimate, all right? Let's just go into fantasy world for a moment. That somebody wouldn't try to capitalize off of it and say, look, this is what happened on 9/11, but we're going to stop that from happening in our building. This can't happen with our thing because of this and that reason, and therefore you should go with our firm. If you just want to look at it from a business angle. But no, again, like you say, silence. The silence speaks volumes because there is an issue with the official story. The official story is a lie. Controlled demolition brought those buildings down. Going to your career in the military, I've asked this before, and you might be in a good position to try to answer this. Since the military can just throw missiles at installations from miles away, or they can fire rockets from drones now, why does it need people in the Green Berets to know about explosives and destroy vehicles and steel structures?
Well, you got to keep in mind that when I got that training was back in the 60s, so a lot of the capabilities that you just mentioned, drones, for instance, were not available. The Green Berets were a counterintelligence organization, and they were basically terrorists in uniforms who were, you could create havoc in a particular area by destroying civic structures, destroying military structures, and so on and so forth. So, they cross-trained you in all these various fields so that when you were infiltrated into an area, you could cause quite a bit of disruption that could then perhaps be blamed on somebody else and used to inflame, political tensions. So they were simply utilizing the traditional methods of warfare to inflame political tensions, and they were. It was always under the Green Berets worked directly with the CIA. They were sent into areas to create conflict so that could then be capitalized upon. That's what that was all about.
Now, I don't want to get you in any trouble here, so feel free to say no comment, but did you, with the training you got and what you just described of what the Green Berets do, did you ever do any kind of clandestine explosive work during your service?
No, I didn't, because I avoided it. I was already a critic my father, I'll tell you, just a little bit of background. My father was in the Navy for 30 years. He was a poor guy from the South who joined when he was 15, got in right before the Depression hit, was lucky to have meals on the table. And he was sent to radar school in the early 40s. He was stationed aboard the USS Arizona when it was sunk at Pearl Harbor. And he fought then, World War II and Korea. And my father, through his experiences, he told me, just because you hear something and everybody is saying it, don't necessarily believe it. He said, you got to be skeptical. Things aren't always what they seem to be. Only believe half of what you see and nothing of what you hear. Things like that. He had learned to be skeptical because so much of the time what he had been told and what he had been led to believe turned out to be wrong. So I had that sort of ingrained into me before I even got into the military. I was skeptical of everything, and in the Green Berets, they basically were involved in terrorism, and I saw that. I read Mao's book on guerrilla warfare, and Mao, as far as I was concerned, Mao had it right. The army was used to help the people. If they needed a well, dig them a well. If they needed medical care, give them medical care. The Green Berets, on the other hand, went in and just, tried to decapitate whatever leadership they thought by terrorizing people. And it occurred to me early on that we were going to lose the war in Vietnam because we had a losing strategy. And, I didn't quite fit in. As a result, I didn't get, sent to a lot of places that they felt that they could count on somebody to do their bidding. I voiced my opposition even then.
This kind of gets into speculating on what's going on in people's minds, but I'm curious, just from your background, you describe what the Green Berets do is sort of legalize terrorism, legalized at least under our government's jurisdiction, because they're achieving our government's aims and blowing up something to try to get some kind of political end achieved. Why wouldn't this occur to people in our military, people in our defense establishment, that somebody could have been doing this on 9/11? Obviously, the evidence shows that we have controlled demolition. And even if people say that they don't agree with it on the air, that doesn't necessarily mean that they really don't agree with it. They probably know this. So why wouldn't it occur to more and more people, since we do this, and obviously other governments do this kind of stuff, that some kind of entity, whether it be another government, some kind of other organized group, may not have gotten these explosives into the buildings and performed this in order to achieve the same kind of ends that we've tried to achieve in other countries?
Well, I'm sure that there are many people in the military establishment presently that know exactly what happened. That from the looking at the evidence and knowing what they know about explosives and so on and so forth, they can figure it out. But they're, what voice do they have if they? I was in that situation. If you voice any dissent within the military, a very hierarchical organization, you're going to pay a severe price for it. There's not room for that kind of dissent. You don't question the mission. The mission is given to you by a higher authority, a civilian government, and your job is to carry it out, not to question it, not to question the reasoning or the strategy, or just carry it out. Just follow orders and do what you're told. If you don't and you raise questions about it, you're seen as a enemy. You're an element that needs to be dealt with quickly, because you're going to interfere with the carrying out of that mission. That is the job of the military. That's just the way it is. So these guys, regardless of what their experience and knowledge tells them, if they're going to be part of the military, they're not going to be able to say anything with any effect for very long, because they're going to be, relieved of command or kicked out or subject to some form of retaliation that's going to be very harmful to them and to their family. So, they look at it, well, I signed on, I signed a contract, I'll do what I'm told, I got a family to raise or whatever, and I'm going to do what I can do. But it causes tremendous internal stress in those individuals, and I think you're seeing that in the suicide rate of the current armed forces.
No, there's a lot of people, because our issue, 9/11 Truth, touches so many other issues. We're sort of like an arsenal in those issues. Like, for instance, people who protest against the mass surveillance. What was used to justify the surveillance? 9/11. Well, you want to know about 9/11? Look at Building 7 and AE 9/11 Truth. That kind of stuff. So there's a lot of people out there who have issues with the way the military is being used now in the post-9/11 world, and cite our information to reach out to people in the military for whatever reasons, whether they want them just to be aware of it or if they want them to speak out on it, act on it, whatever. They use our information. Do you think it's productive? Do you think we're able to have some kind of military outreach? And if so, what do you think the best means of doing that are?
I think that by supporting the veterans. Now, they make a big deal out of supporting the veterans, but they're actually not doing a very good job of supporting the veterans at all. They give it a lot of lip service. From everything that I can determine, the support for the veterans is extremely lacking. The current crisis or the recent news about the problems with the VA is an example. You got a system that is barely providing anything remotely considered to be necessary to help these guys when they get back. But I think, reaching out through the veterans assistance programs and talking about, let's go back to the cause of this war. And for these guys, it may be very painful for them to have to look at that information, but they are being promoted as the heroes of today, and we need to point out that, all this tragedy and all this sacrifice is just the most despicable, horrible kind of crime that's been carried out in our time. And we have a duty to explain that to people. And I think that these guys that have gone out, these men and women that have gone out and paid this horrible price in their lives, need to know that information, and we need to stand with them because they are some of the direct victims of this crime. And
a lot of that involves reaching out to young people because that's what the military targets. Because, again, young guys, I've been there myself, you think that you're missing out on something in the world or that you're going to have some great adventure. I almost joined the Navy in the lead up to Iraq. I'll tell that story someday on the show. But that's what they appeal to. And young people are also students in universities, and you've been a professor, a teacher on engineering subjects. And so we talked earlier about the effect that 9/11 had on the building profession. What about the education aspect, the engineering education? Have they talked about this in classes? Has this been addressed, and any adjustments to a curriculum, those kinds of things?
Well, I can only speak from my own experience. I know that we tried to reach out to Berkeley, because I'm still here in the East Bay, and couldn't get any response from the school there. But then once again, the campus is being invaded by corporate money. Bechtel and so on and so forth have made huge investments in the university. These are defense contractors. So once again, the academic world is tied to the economic world, and the economic world is dominated in many ways by the military-industrial complex, and therefore, your comments, my comments, attempts to reach out to professors there were singularly unsuccessful. I don't think, traditionally you go into engineering classes and they're snowing you down with so much information, so much science, so much mathematics that you're just overwhelmed with the workload of trying to even grasp all the information that they're throwing at you, but never, ever. Well, in my case, I had one class, a class on engineering economics, that looked at some of the issues. It was a very small class, very short, and it looked at some of the issues of the industry as, and as it compares to the economy. And I think that's the one thing that I really didn't understand very well when I became an engineer, was that, yeah, we could design this stuff and we could build it, but we didn't decide what to design and what to build. Those decisions were given to us. So once again, even though I was a civil engineer, I wound up working on a military project. Just that was ubiquitous. That's where all the work was.
Well, it's fascinating because I really like history. I'm not going to say I'm an expert on history. I guarantee there's a zillion people that know more about it than me. But I've always done very well at it, especially in high school. I always got like 98s on my report cards and all of that. So I pay attention to it, and I know there's certain moments in history that are big that you can't just skip. Like if you're studying world history, you really should study the French Revolution. You should study the fall of the Roman Empire. That had a huge impact on world history, U.S. history, the Civil War. You don't really skip the Civil War when you're studying U.S. history. And so looking at engineering, again, I didn't take any engineering classes, but just looking at things that have happened and that affect your profession, it just seems that the fall of Building 7, just focusing on that, would be like the Civil War in U.S. history, the thing that you really need to study to prevent this from happening again, something that you would see an impact from. And from what you're describing, it seems just like with the building professionals, it's glossed over, something insignificant, even though this is a major structural failure. Again, 6.5 seconds, 47-story steel frame high-rise falling pretty much symmetrically straight down there. So I just can't believe that they can overlook that. Did it ever get brought up in any of your classes? Any students ask why this building came down? Any discussion of it?
Well, I wasn't teaching at that time. I was working for a small architect engineering firm in Oakland, so I wasn't teaching anymore. But I found that I was somewhat I've always been, I guess, somewhat of an odd duck. In my classes, I would always go into the historical development of whatever it was that we were talking about, the forces that had shaped it, how it came into being, because like you, I believe that you can't really understand where you are until you understand where you've been and how you got there. And so I always tried to put the engineering into the context of what's going on in society. But I found at that time, when I was teaching, that I was pretty much alone. I mean, in the first place, like I said, I think there's a historical denial in the engineering profession about the role that we've played throughout society, which has always had to do with weaponry and war. And I think for that reason, there's just an innate tendency to want to shy away from that subject, because it's really, it's in many ways, and I've had engineers say to this, in many ways, a very shameful history, because we've always been harnessed to the forces that were creating war and that were defending empires, and okay, that's a part of human history, but it's kind of like it's just a little bit too uncomfortable to explain. Well, gee, how do we fit into that role today, and what's our role today? What role are we playing? It's not always so easy to look at.
No, and again, as we described earlier, when you have the federal government being the source of revenue for a large many people in a particular profession, it sort of compromises that profession, because again, if that source somehow becomes corrupted, even just with a cover-up of this event, then people will be afraid of speaking out about it. Now, I like to think that we're reaching people who may be on the fence, people who may be in the closet about this topic, engineers. This is a great resource, I think this show is, for getting really in-depth discussions with all of those experts speak out, because we get into these other kinds of discussions like we're having right now. What would you have to say to those engineers, those people who are considering signing the petition, considering speaking out, maybe considering some other kind of action that we haven't even thought about that would benefit this cause greatly? What would you have to say to them about the importance of standing up, speaking out on this issue, and doing whatever you can to let it be known by more people?
I think I would speak. I would say, I'm not going to judge your particular specific situation and the situation that you're in, because there's a specificity to everybody's situation. But I would say this: look for doing what you can do. Don't hide from the information. Investigate it. You've got to convince yourself that the analysis that AE 911 is putting forward is valid, or has a high probability of being valid. And then think about what the importance it is to the general populace that somebody like yourself, with your professional background, this is your profession, this is your field, you are an expert, you can speak out on it. That has a tremendous effect upon the way that other people think. If they hear it coming from an expert, rightly or wrongly, they're much more likely to be open to the fact that this may be some truthful, helpful, useful information. So that's just the way that we're conditioned. I think you should be skeptical of all things, and so should they. But the point is that once you have studied a field, and the world today is so specialized, you study the field, you got a degree, you went to school, you're licensed, you have the ability to speak out on that field, and furthermore, you have a responsibility to the public and the society that gave you that education. So, I don't want to lay a guilt trip and say you should do this and you have to do it this way. There's a way to find a way. You can find a way to do something. Whether it's whatever it is that you can do, you should maximize that. You should strive to do that within the confines of whatever particular situation that you're in. You may be sitting in an office building somewhere in a cubicle, working for a company that's got a big government contract, and you know damn well if you said anything like this, you're going to get nothing but sideways glances and be shunned. Okay, maybe that's not the way for you to go. Maybe there's another way for you to go through your personal contacts or through through friends. There's things that you can do. Try to find out what they are and look upon it as your duty to do so. That is your duty. That's your professional responsibility. We gave you that responsibility. You need to exercise it.
And I always love listening to people in the sciences talk with each other about these kinds of issues. I mean, there's really no issue like 9/11 truth and the building destructions in New York, the debate about it, because there's so much attached to it in terms of emotion and politics. But just, in terms of other things, I always use the example of the makeup of a certain moss growing on a rock, and to hear people have these very rational discussions. And it's really sad that we haven't been allowed to have these rational discussions except on the internet, because on TV we get loudmouths who essentially just attack people and call names and raise the tone of the conversation several decibels to a point where most people who are on the fence just want to turn it off. But you're right, and you bring up a point that I always say is, when I'm dealing with groups or having to lead a project, I don't really like to tell people what to do, because people have in their minds what they want to do anyway. They have certain kinds of activism they want to do, certain ways that they want to reach out, and that way is best for them. And this applies to what you said with engineers. Someone may not feel comfortable coming on a program like this and having an hour-long discussion with me about it, but there's other things. You can reach out through the contacts, like you said, and there's probably things that you can think of that I can't, that Roland can't, but you know what it is. And even if it's a small thing, again, you have no idea how what you do is going to wake other people up. I'm doing this show here for 2 years now, 2.5 years, essentially because somebody misfiled a video in the wrong site. So again, whatever you do, as long as it's creating some kind of resistance, you can do it anonymously, but do it. All right, because you're going to have a tremendous impact. And our last few minutes, Roland, I want to ask you, I asked this of a lot of people on this program, and it always makes for a good closing note. But what gives you hope? What keeps you in this fight and makes you think that we could have justice in the end?
I just don't think it's possible to hide the obvious truth in plain sight and have it stand up historically over time. Right now, maybe it's not possible because the forces that brought this whole crime into being are still very much on the scene, and so they're obviously still able to control the dialogue to the point where it doesn't come out into the open. But I don't think that's going to be forever. I just think that over time, if you're right, you're right. I mean, Galileo was right, and the Pope was wrong. Took the Catholic Church a few hundred years to admit it, but that's the way it went. You know what I mean? This is an act of physics, essentially, and physics. The laws of physics weren't suspended that day. Okay, so therefore, the forensic evidence stands. Whether you can get a political body to agree that in fact has validity or not at this particular time, no. But over time, we are truth seekers.
Right, and as Marcy Kaptur said when she was questioned about this on C-SPAN's Washington Journal, she said, truth will out. And essentially, what I get from that statement is that the truth will be set free one way or another. Reality has a way of making itself known and asserting its position over the agendas and lies of people. So I just feel that if we keep on pushing and keep on doing our best, the natural order of things is that the truth will prevail. And you're a testament to that, speaking out all of these years. And I appreciate everything you've done, especially in putting your name on that petition. Roland Angle, thank you so much for coming on 9/11 Freefall.
Thanks very much for having me, and thanks for what you're doing, everything that you're doing as well.
You can hear this program every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also download MP3s of this show from the Internet Archive by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.